this man in the police uniform came out of the forest behind us, and told us they caught the bad guy. And I relayed that to my father while the guy in the police uniform lifted his gun and started shooting at our group. And turns out that was Breivik. Growing up in kind of the most diverse neighborhood of town, I kind of very early on learned that like people are being treated differently. Being in a white Norwegian, I saw that my friends who had other origins were often discriminated against in different contexts, etc. And so because of that, kind of the sense of injustice of that, I got involved in politics. I started off doing kind of school politics, working within student councils, etc., and then joined later the Labour Party and the Labour Youth Party in Norway. Through that, started working on both educational policy, working on social policy of different sorts, and then realized that most people don't really care about politics. Like we can talk at length about statistics and about how society works, but the thing that really like changes how people feel about each other within a society isn't necessarily the facts, but how they feel. And so because of that, started to explore more using creative storytelling as a tool for shaping shaping people's minds in different ways, or like getting people to think about things differently. And so because of that, I decided to go in and study theater production, and studied theater production and technology for a couple of years in Liverpool. So I went back to Norway on summer vacation, and went out to the Labour Youth Party summer camp to connect with old friends who I hadn't seen for a year. It was after my first year at university. So I think it was somewhere between 500 and 800 people from all across Norway. So Norway is a country of about 5 million people. The Labour Youth Party has small regional clusters all over the country. This summer camp is really kind of the annual gathering place for the party, and so people from all over the country come in and meet there. I came out to the island kind of the day before the terrorist attack, and the summer camp had already been going on for a couple of days. I had to work for some of it, and decided to skip work on the Friday, which was the 22nd of July when the terrorist attack happened. So I came out in the evening of the 21st. During the 22nd of July, we had like our meetings, like there were workshops, and there were guest speakers and things like that. While that was going on the island, a car bomb was planted in near the government headquarters in downtown Oslo and blew up, and the government headquarters were pretty much shattered. I think about 8 people died in that bombing. Thankfully, it was during the height of summer vacation, and so not a lot of people were in their offices. Otherwise, the bomb blast would have been more devastating than it already was. And so that was Breivik who had planted the bomb. We didn't know what had exploded, but we started getting text messages and things like that from friends and family, and we started reading the news and trying to figure out what was going on. There were theories that this might be a gas explosion or something like that, because no one could really imagine even that there would be a terrorist attack in Norway. We kind of gathered the Oslo delegation, and we were told that the safest place to be was on the island, and the best idea was to stay put rather than try to go into town, because like some of us wanted to leave and connect with family and so on. We started hearing like loud popping sounds. The first kind of assumption was someone's firing off fireworks or something like that, who haven't realized what's going on in Oslo. But then in the distance from where I was on the campsite, we saw a man in dark clothes. Turns out later, a fake police uniform was walking across kind of there's like a little ridge, and he was walking across that, and some people ran towards him, and he lifted his gun and shot those people straight down, and I turned around and ran into the forest surrounding the campsite. So that was how we realized that something was going on the island as well. Cognitively, it didn't really make sense. Like, this was a summer camp in the Norwegian countryside. Like, terrorist attacks do not happen in that reality, and so this was kind of the unimaginable. And trying to realize that the unimaginable was happening was a big kind of challenge in some sort of way. Even though I ran and I hid, I was still trying to rationalize what was happening. Like, was this some weird exercise? Making sense of it in the moment was even a challenge, and but it was really happening, and so yeah. I ran into the woods that were surrounding the camp area. I called my father in the hopes that he might have some idea about the reality of this. And his advice was to stay hidden, which, good advice. The island is very small. It takes 10 minutes to walk around the kind of circumference of it. On that track was a lot of people who were confused about what was happening, kind of standing up and talking loudly. So me and a friend started kind of telling people to be quiet and stay hidden, try to cover up very visible clothing. Like, the color of the party is red, and so a lot of people were wearing red t-shirts. And on that track, I also found an 8-year-old boy sitting. His father was among the security personnel on the island, and later turns out was among the first people to get shot on the island. I took this 8-year-old boy, and we found a hiding spot not so far away from the track, and we kind of lay down on the ground there and stayed hidden while consistently hearing gunshots around us. There was a lot of echo, and so it's difficult to kind of place where the shots were coming from. And we stayed there for almost an hour, I believe, while this was happening. After a while, the shots came closer to where we were, and a group of people came running through just the bush where we were hiding. And so we joined that group, believing that they were running from Breivik. And in that group was another kid. I was a friend of the kid I was hiding with. So I ran with the two kids along the track around the island. We ended up running into a place where we couldn't follow the track anymore because there was so many dead bodies on it. Somehow we ended up on the southern tip of the island, where there's some rocks going out into the water. We saw that people were swimming. The kids couldn't swim that well, so I decided to not do that. We saw that there was a helicopter in the air. We believe that was a police helicopter. Later turned out to be the National Broadcasting Company filming us. We saw boats in the water, so we tried to get the attention of the helicopter and of the boats to get help. I lent my phone to the kids so they could call their mothers, telling them that they shouldn't call their fathers in case they were hiding on the island, but also knowing that their fathers would probably not pick up. And they did, and I called my father and told him that so far I was still alive, and at that point we hadn't heard shots for a little while. While I was on the phone with him, this man in a police uniform came out of the forest behind us and told us they caught the bad guy, and I relayed that to my father while the guy in the police uniform lifted his gun and started shooting at our group. And turns out that was Breivik. And I jumped in the water. So the last thing my father heard was that we're safe, the police is here. And my phone died. And the kids and I swam kind of straight out for a little bit. It's very shallow, so swimming, crawling on the ground. With people getting shot around us. And I was wearing a big woolen jumper at the time, and kind of sank and then stood back up in the water and pulled that off. And after doing that, I looked back towards land and saw Breivik take aim at me and realized that this is the end. And that was a very surreal moment. Breivik fired, he missed, terrible shot, thankfully. I ended up falling over in the water and making my way kind of around a little edge and hiding under some bushes that were hanging out over the water. The two young boys joined me, and we stayed in the water while Breivik walked back up onto the island where he was arrested by the actual police. And so, yeah, we then stayed in the water for quite a bit until the kids basically turned blue. And we hadn't heard shots for quite some time again, and climbed back up onto some rocks. And then after a while, the actual police came. They had a bit of a hard time getting us to trust that they were the actual police. Like we were kind of exhausted at that point, and ended up eventually getting a boat back over to the mainland from the island. So yeah. I don't think I'll be able to forget it ever. It took a long time to kind of get back to kind of some degree of normalcy, years even of dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. Part of that was also kind of understanding the concrete details of what had happened. Familiarizing myself with that story was part of how I dealt with kind of the facts of what had happened to me. Also trying to understand how we ended up there, how Breivik became really a part of my healing process. Attended as many court days as possible. I read the manifesto. I ended up studying extremism, and at this point have dedicated the last 11 or so years to kind of fighting terrorism and extremism based largely on this experience. It became a driving force in doing all of that. But also like the initial stages of that was very much try to piece together the puzzle of what had happened and learn for myself how to deal with it.
Hi, and welcome to Deep.
We're a brand new channel from the team behind such shows as
Agree to Disagree, Minutes Within the Gap, to name a few.
And now we've launched this new channel to keep telling stories.
And we love to hear what you think. So if there's a particular person you want to hear from, a particular theme that you want us to cover, please drop us a comment, and also like and subscribe for more.
Thanks. Now back to the story.
Breivik was still is a far-right extremist, as we broadly classify it. He was very Islamophobic, and his main motivation was really wanting to stop immigration to Norway from the Muslim world. So like this is a fairly common ideology that we see across the European far-right. We see it with things like the English Defence League here in the UK, Pegida protests during the mid-2010s across most of Europe, the identitarian movement that has a lot of prominence, for instance, in Austria. Like it's not a very unique thing. And we've also seen other terrorists conduct terrorist attacks kind of rooted in the same belief system later. So Breivik served as an inspiration for a lot of subsequent attacks, including the terrible attack in Christchurch in New Zealand in 2019, and a number of others as well. Like the targeting of the event was probably motivated by, in part, shock value. Attacking young people at the summer camp is going to draw a lot of attention. And we see that being a strategy from terrorists across ideological spectrum, that they attack kind of high visibility scenarios. We've seen that with things like the Manchester Arena attack here in the UK. We've seen it with attacks in Paris and Belgium, etc. That both far-right extremists as well as Islamist-inspired extremists are attacking large gatherings, particularly of young people, that is a conscious strategy to also draw a lot of attention to the attack and the motivation behind the attack. The perception among the Norwegian far right in particular was that the Labour Party was very liberal on immigration, which, like, from the perspective of someone who is liberal on immigration, isn't necessarily the case. Like, I view the Norwegian Labour Party as reasonably conservative when it comes to immigration, but still they viewed the government and the party as opening the doors to immigration in a way that was harmful to some weird fantasy about Norway as kind of a white Christian ethno-state almost. And so that was kind of the political side of the targeting as well. So there was this combination of like a political motivation as well as of wanting to draw attention. I don't think it's possible to ever understand fully how someone ends up becoming like Breivik, and Breivik is not particularly collaborative in that either. He's still very much a far-right extremist. He's still very much imprisoned for that. It's hard to kind of finalize any conclusions there, but also like learning that was a process. What I did was start working with people who had been similar to Breivik in some sort of way. People had been radicalized into extremist movements. And so I started traveling the world and meeting with former extremists, people who had been in these movements and who had left, trying to learn what their journeys into the movements had been was kind of my primary goal, because I wanted to understand the process of radicalization and kind of the rationalization of that kind of hatred. And then, and while I was doing that, I started realizing that, hey, all of these people have left these movements as well, and started working more on understanding what the trajectories back out of the movements were. And so through that, learned a lot about the process of radicalization and potential places for intervention against that, but also started learning about processes of healing and rehabilitation and how people also were able to come back out of these movements. In that, found kind of a hope in humanity in some way. I always had faith in humanity, but there's kind of power in that people are able to change and people are able to come back out of fairly extreme ideologies in some sort of way. Learning about that, also started working with various institutions to operationalize that in creating both prevention programs, helping people not join extremist movements in the first place, and then also help develop and design rehabilitation programs and get people who were radicalized to leave those movements in different ways. What we've found is that people who are getting radicalized are enormously diverse. There's no single like indicator or path that this person is going to be radicalized. And in most cases, when we look at the factors that are common to people who are being radicalized, those factors are also enormously common to a lot of people who are not being radicalized. It teaches us that it's important not to do profiling, but at the same time, it also teaches us that there are some factors that we all need as humans. One of the strongest drivers there is the importance of a sense of belonging and a sense of value within some sort of community, which is something that is being exploited by people who are grooming people into joining extremist movements, where they latch onto the people that they want to radicalize and cut them off from kind of pre-existing friend groups or even their families, replace that with an extremist group, with an extremist ideology, and then ties together the sense of value and the sense of belonging and the sense of identity of an individual with the extremist ideology. And we see this kind of pattern of kind of active radicalization across Islamist extremist groups, as well as far-right extremist groups and other extremist ideological groups around the world. One of the things I often say is that extremism exists in kind of the balance between fear and supremacy. Like, extremists believe that they are more valuable than the rest of humanity in some sort of way, that they've found the correct path. And at the same time, they are enormously afraid of everyone else. The extremist movements are reasonably adaptable in some sort of way. They kind of adopt issues that are reasonably easy to target. And immigration is an issue that is controversial and easy to kind of build engagement around. At the same time, we're seeing kind of longer historic conspiracy theories, etc. A lot of migration we've seen in Europe from the Middle East and North Africa over the last couple of decades are by some of these extremist communities being viewed as part of kind of a Jewish world order, trying to replace the European population with a Muslim population in order to escalate conflict. At the root of a lot of that is kind of this deeply rooted anti-Semitism, as well as that being kind of used to justify Islamophobia. Like, people who are in pain will cause pain for others. And the easiest way of breaking that cycle is by dealing with your pain in healthier ways than by causing pain for others. And so helping people deal with trauma, deal with the pain and suffering in their own lives in ways that aren't damaging to themselves and other people is really at the heart of a lot of how we are breaking the cycles. We want to deal with humanity in these healthier ways in order to not escalate violence and create a forever more violent society. Breivik was sentenced to 21 years, but then with the option of extending it in kind of 4-year cycles if he's still seen as a threat to society after those 21 years. The reasoning behind the way in which the Norwegian prison system works is rehabilitative. So like there is one punitive component to imprisoning people, but also a goal of imprisonment is to rehabilitate them and help them find ways to re-enter society as productive citizens. There's no sign as of right now that Breivik will ever be rehabilitated. He's very strongly repeated his ideological bearings and general hatred, etc. And so like the risk of recidivism is definitely still there. And so it's unlikely that he will get out after the 21 years. And I would say unlikely that he will ever get back out. I felt very strongly after the attack was that we shouldn't give this individual, Breivik, the power to change how our system works or how we kind of as a community and as a culture view humanity. We should view humanity as recoverable in some sort of way. We should view it as possible for people to rehabilitate. That seems like the healthier way of dealing with crime in many ways. And that also shows up in things like crime statistics, where recidivism in Norway, people recommitting crimes after having served in prison, is enormously low compared to in a lot of other countries. I do believe people can change, and I've seen people change. I've seen people change and then change back to being bad in different ways. Like people are complicated, and in most scenarios you get like a snapshot of where people are at that day. But people evolve, people learn, people change. The question is how we utilize that in order to help people change for the better, both for themselves and for society at large. Like right now, I run a nonprofit called the Khalifa Ihler Institute and a company called Reventuret. The Khalifa Ihler Institute is designed to build peaceful and thriving communities. And so in that, we do a lot of the rehabilitation work, working with communities on recovering from trauma, but also the preventative work in trying to build resilience against people being radicalized in the first place. It's really important to us to try to detect as early as possible when things are going wrong, so that we can put in place measures to keep people safe, and also so that we can make sure that the people who are engaged in these movements get out of it as smoothly as possible. And sometimes that includes working with law enforcement in order to intervene and prevent violence from happening, but also a lot of the time it involves using other tools at our disposal, outreach, communication campaigns, etc., to try to prevent people from going down these paths. It really depends on the community which platforms are the most used. We are seeing increasingly that kind of more distributed platforms are being used. So Telegram is kind of our go-to. We've also seen kind of Discord be a factor. Like more direct messaging platforms are often used, where kind of larger group chats often are where we are detecting. But also we've seen like the use of mainstream platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., for spreading propaganda. People who are being radicalized are cutting off more of their original relationships. So part of a radicalization process is often being more and more secluded, but also more and more drawn into kind of a replacement community. But there's often support you can get either from like public services or from like nonprofits, etc., in your area to deal with that. So I don't know if you ever truly recover from PTSD. You learn to live with it in different ways. I still have a very active relationship with it, but I don't have kind of the severe symptoms of PTSD that I had initially, of like enormous fear, like sleep deprivation, like all of these things that have come as very natural reactions to going through something like that. And so like it's a healing process, and I assume I will be kind of on the journey of healing for the rest of my life. But at this point, I'm able to kind of live a very normal life without the trauma symptoms being ever present.